In the early 1940s, the skies over Europe had turned into an invisible battlefield, a place where the fate of entire cities was decided thousands of meters above the ground. It was the era of World War II, and every single day, formations of bombers crossed the sky, carrying tons of explosives. For the pilots inside those aircraft, each mission felt like a journey, with no guarantee of return. The roar of the engines echoed above the clouds as entire squadrons moved slowly toward enemy territory. But there was a major problem. During much of these missions, the bombers had to fly long distances, almost completely alone. Enemy fighters could appear at any moment on the horizon, and when they did, the sky turned into a scene of chases, gunfire, and explosions. It was in this dangerous context that a new type of aircraft began to draw attention, a fast fighter with long range, capable of changing the balance of the air war, the legendary P-51 Mustang. As the war continued to escalate, military strategists began to understand something crucial. Destroying the enemy's infrastructure was essential to weaken their ability to keep fighting. Weapons factories, fuel refineries, and railway networks became priority targets. To strike these objectives, large formations of heavy bombers were sent deep into occupied Europe. Aircraft like the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress were built to fly at high altitude and withstand heavy damage, while carrying massive loads of bomb. But even these powerful aircraft had their limits. Their defensive guns could protect them only to a certain extent, and as they approached heavily defended territory, they were often intercepted by fast German fighters like the Iowa Messerschmitt Bf 109. These encounters were fast and brutal. Fighter pilots would dive at incredible speed toward the bomber formations, firing bursts of gunfire before disappearing once again into the clouds. Many missions ended with aircraft badly damaged or shot down entirely. For Allied planners, the conclusion became unavoidable. Something had to change. The bombers needed constant protection for the entire mission. As the losses continued to mount, engineers and military strategists began searching for a solution that could change the balance of the air war. The problem was not simply speed or firepower. Many fighter planes were already fast and heavily armed. The real challenge was something else: range. Most fighters simply could not escort the bombers and for the entire mission, long before reaching the deepest targets. Inside occupied Europe, they were forced to turn back toward base, and that left the bombers dangerously exposed during the most critical part of the journey. It was at this moment that engineers at North American Aviation began working on a new project, one that seemed remarkably ambitious for its time. Their goal was to create a fighter aircraft capable of flying much longer distances without sacrificing speed or maneuverability. In theory, the idea sounded simple, but in reality, it was an enormous challenge. This new aircraft would need to escort bombers deep into enemy territory, fight off enemy fighters, and still have enough range to return home safely. If it worked, it could completely transform the way the war was fought in the skies. By the early 1940s, the project was finally beginning to take shape. Engineers at North American Aviation worked relentlessly to turn their ambitious idea into a real aircraft. What emerged was a remarkably elegant design, a sleek, aerodynamic fuselage, and wings carefully engineered to reduce drag as the aircraft sliced through the air. This new fighter would soon receive a name that would become legendary: the P-51 Mustang. During the first test flights, pilots quickly realized they were flying something different. The Mustang responded instantly to the controls, smooth, precise, and incredibly stable, even at high altitudes. Its performance remained impressive, but what truly transformed the aircraft was the addition of an exceptionally powerful engine. With it, the Mustang gained speed and performance that surpassed many fighters of its time. Suddenly, what had once been an experimental concept was revealing enormous potential. If everything worked as engineers hoped, the Mustang could finally do what so many aircraft before it could not: escort Allied bombers across long and dangerous missions deep into enemy territory. When the first P-51 Mustangs began their evaluation flights, expectations were already high, but the reality soon exceeded many of them. During the early tests, pilots quickly noticed that the aircraft felt remarkably balanced in the air. The controls were smooth, precise, and highly responsive. At high speeds, the Mustang remained stable and confident. It could climb rapidly and dive with controlled power. In aerial combat, these qualities could mean the difference between survival and defeat. But another feature captured the attention of military planners: its range. With additional fuel tanks, the Mustang could travel far greater distances than most fighters of its time, and that meant something crucial. For the first time, a fighter aircraft could escort bomber formations for nearly the entire mission. Those early test flights revealed something extraordinary. The Mustang was not just another new aircraft. It had the potential to change the dynamics of the air war itself. As more units of the P-51 Mustang rolled off the production lines, fighter squadrons began intensive training with the new aircraft. Experienced pilots quickly realized that the Mustang possessed qualities that could prove decisive in combat. Its speed allowed pilots to reach enemy formations quickly, while its extended range made it possible to remain in the air far longer than most fighters of the time. At Allied air bases, mechanics worked day and night, carefully preparing the aircraft for the missions ahead. Fuel systems were checked, weapons were loaded, engines were tested again and again. Meanwhile, pilots gathered around maps and briefing tables. They studied flight routes, escort formations, and the locations where enemy fighters were most likely to appear. Very soon, the Mustang would no longer be just a promising design or a successful prototype. It would become an active part of the massive air operations that crossed the skies of Europe during World War II. And once those missions began, pilots would quickly discover that encounters with enemy fighters were unavoidable. When squadrons equipped with the P-51 Mustang began joining combat missions, the dynamics of aerial operations started to change. For the first time, Allied bombers could rely on fighter escort for most of their long journeys over enemy territory. At air bases in England, pilots gathered before dawn. Inside briefing rooms, they received detailed instructions about the day's target. Soon after takeoff, the Mustangs climbed rapidly through the cold morning sky until they reached the massive bomber formations. Aircraft like the B-17 Flying Fortress moved forward steadily, heading toward the European continent. The mission for Mustang pilots was clear: stay close to the bombers, Watch the horizon and be ready to react at any moment. For long stretches of the flight, the sky could appear calm, almost peaceful. But everyone knew that this calm could vanish in seconds. Enemy fighters often waited for the perfect moment to strike. And when they finally appeared, emerging from distant clouds or detected on radar, the escort pilots had to respond immediately. During many of these escort missions, the most tense moment came suddenly. Observers would spot small dark dots appearing on the horizon. At first, they looked like distant shadows, but within seconds, they began to grow larger. Enemy aircraft, approaching at high speed. Among the most common was the Messerschmitt Bf 109. As soon as the threat was confirmed, Mustang pilots received permission to break away from the bomber formation. Their objective was immediate interception. In just a few moments, the quiet sky could transform completely. What had seemed calm now became a battlefield. Engines roared at full power. Aircraft dived sharply, then climbed again. Through the clouds, fast pursuits and dangerous maneuvers unfolded high above the earth for every Mustang pilot. The priority was simple: stop the enemy fighters before they could reach the bombers. But to do that, they had to enter the fight themselves. When the fighters finally closed the distance, the battle began. In a matter of seconds, Mustang pilots pushed the throttle to maximum power, diving directly toward the incoming aircraft. At the same time, German pilots, in their Bf 109 fighters, maneuvered aggressively, trying to gain altitude or slip behind the Allied escort. Within moments, the sky turned into chaos, a maze of smoke trails, tight turns, and bursts of machine gun fire. Every movement had to be calculated in fractions of a second. So a pilot might suddenly pull the control stick back, climbing sharply into a spiral, then dropping down again in an attempt to get behind the enemy. If the target aligned in the gun sight, there was no hesitation. The pilot pressed the trigger. A stream of bullets cut through the air toward the opposing aircraft. Many of these dogfights lasted only a few minutes, but those minutes were intense enough to decide the fate of both pilots and machines. And far below them, the bomber formations continued their slow advance toward the target, while fierce combat unfolded around them. The primary mission of the P-51 Mustang pilots remained unchanged: protect the bombers. High above the clouds, large formations of aircraft moved steadily forward. Bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress flew in tight formation, each aircraft holding its precise position in the sky. Inside those heavy bombers were crews responsible for delivering massive payloads to strategic targets deep inside enemy territory. But these aircraft were large and relatively slow. Without protection, they were vulnerable to enemy fighters. That is where the Mustangs made the difference. Whenever enemy aircraft attempted to approach the bomber formations, Mustang pilots moved quickly to intercept. They forced enemy fighters to engage them first, before they could reach the bombers. Gradually, this protection began to change the outcome of many missions. More bomber formations were able to reach their targets, and above them, the escort fighters kept enemy aircraft busy. Fast in intense battles across the skies of Europe, As the months passed, the constant presence of the P-51 Mustang began to change something important: the balance of the air war over Europe. Before this moment, bomber formations often faced relentless attacks from German fighters. Shortly after entering defended airspace. But now, those attacks were becoming far more difficult. Pilots of the Luftwaffe understood the new reality. If they attempted to reach the bombers, they would likely encounter Mustang fighters already waiting to intercept them. Many of these clashes happened far from the bomber formations themselves, fighter aircraft engaging each other dozens of kilometers away from the main targets. And while these battles unfolded high in the sky, bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress continued their steady advance, heading toward Berchtesgaden. Industrial cities and military production centers, slowly but surely. Allied strategists began to notice a critical shift. Air superiority was starting to tilt in their favor, and that change would have direct consequences for the course of World War II. With stronger protection in the skies, the bombing campaigns began to achieve increasingly significant results, now escorted me by fighters like the P-51 Mustang. Allied bombers could travel much deeper into territory controlled by Germany. Large formations crossed the European continent, carrying powerful bomb loads toward strategic targets, factories, fuel depots, and critical rail networks. Each successful mission gradually weakened Germany's ability to sustain the war. Meanwhile, Mustang pilots continued to patrol the skies, constantly watching for any sign of enemy interception. Often, even after escorting the bombers to their targets, these fighters still had enough fuel to remain in the area, ready to confront any late attempt to attack the formation. Little by little, this combination of range, speed, and constant presence helped the Allies gain increasing control of the airspace during World War II. For the pilots who flew the P-51 Mustang, every mission was a test of discipline, skill, and nerves of steel. Before each flight, they gathered inside briefing rooms. There, they studied maps, flight routes, and weather conditions. Officers explained where enemy fighters might appear and where heavy anti-aircraft defenses were most likely to be encountered. Every detail was carefully analyzed. But even with all this preparation, the sky remained unpredictable. Once airborne, pilots had to remain alert at every moment, watching the horizon, scanning the clouds, because a confrontation could begin at any second. Often, they had only moments to react when enemy aircraft suddenly appeared. Despite the danger, they understood the importance of their role. Their presence in the sky helped ensure that the larger missions could continue. Throughout World War II, these pilots became a crucial part of the Allied air strategy, flying mission after mission over hostile territory. As the final years of World War II approached, Allied dominance in the skies over Europe became increasingly clear. Long-range fighters, like the P-51 Mustang, now patrolled vast areas of the airspace. Enemy interception was becoming far more difficult, with fewer aircraft available to challenge them. German forces struggled to defend their own cities and industrial centers. Meanwhile, bomber formations continued striking strategic targets with growing frequency. Factories, transport networks, and vital infrastructure came under constant pressure. Many historians believe this relentless campaign played a major role in weakening Germany's ability to continue the war. For Mustang pilots, every completed mission meant one thing: they were moving one step closer to the end of the conflict. After years of intense battles in the skies, the role of these fighters would be remembered as one of the key elements in the Allied air victory when World War II finally came to an end. Many of the aircraft that had once filled the skies gradually disappeared from the front lines, but a few of them remained in history, not just as machines of war, but as symbols of an era defined by innovation, courage, and extraordinary challenges. Among those aircraft was the P-51 Mustang, a fighter that earned its reputation through performance, reliability, and success in combat. Over time, the Mustang became one of the most respected fighters of the entire war. Even decades later, many of these aircraft still exist today. Some are preserved inside museums, others have been carefully restored by collectors and aviation enthusiasts at air shows around the world. The distinctive sound of the Mustang's engine can still be heard, echoing across the sky, a reminder of a time when pilots flew dangerous missions over hostile territory. And in the end, the Mustang became something more than just a fighter aircraft. It became a lasting symbol in the history of military aviation.